Bats that fly freely through the night sky can locate their targets with remarkable accuracy, even in environments where almost no light is present. A bat produces extremely high-frequency sound in its larynx, the organ that creates vocal sound, and releases it through its mouth or nostrils, and in some species through specialized nasal structures. The ultrasound waves that leaves its body strikes surrounding objects and returns as reflected waves, and the bat analyzes tiny differences in timing and frequency with its ears and auditory system to determine the distance, direction, and even the size of an object. Because this method does not rely on light, a bat can perceive its surroundings in real time, even in complete darkness. What's fascinating is that humans have studied the same properties of ultrasound and have used them to develop equipment across many industrial fields. So what exactly is ultrasound? What characteristics does it have, and by what principles is it created? In today's episode of Dr. Sai Vera Studio, we explore the material that produces ultrasound and the science behind how it works. Don't forget to subscribe. Now let's begin. Let's begin by exploring what ultrasound actually is. To understand ultrasound, we first need to understand how sound travels. The point where a sound begins is called the sound source. For example, when raindrops fall into a puddle on a rainy day, you can see small ripples forming and spreading outward. Sound behaves in a very similar way. Vibrations created at the sound source travel outward through the surrounding medium. These traveling vibrations are called sound waves. The number of vibrations that occur in 1 second is called the frequency, or hertz. If a vibration occurs once per second, it is 1 hertz, and 4 vibrations per second becomes 4 hertz.
Higher frequencies are perceived as higher-pitched sound,
and lower frequencies as lower-pitched sound.
However, when the frequency rises to about 20 kilohertz, which means 20,000 vibrations per second, the human ear can no longer hear it. This high frequency range that lies beyond human hearing is known as ultrasound. Interestingly, dogs can hear up to about 40 kilohertz, giving them access to a much wider high frequency range than humans. Because of this, they sometimes react to subtle changes in sound more quickly than we do. And this is why people often say dogs sense things earlier. However, the definition of ultrasound is always based on the upper limit of human hearing, and that part never changes. Sound waves do not simply change in pitch as their frequency changes, they also travel in different ways. When the frequency becomes high enough to enter the ultrasound range, the wavelength becomes very short. The waves travel with strong directionality, they do not spread widely, and their reflection and refraction become very distinct. Under certain conditions, they can even pass through materials. For this reason, bats can use ultrasound to determine the exact position of nearby objects even in complete darkness, and humans also make use of these same properties to create a wide range of devices. Now, how can we generate ultrasound artificially? The answer is surprisingly simple. To create ultrasound, we need a material that can vibrate at extremely high speed, and the material that performs this role is the main character of today's story, the piezoelectric material. Let's take a moment to clarify the term. The word piezo comes from a Greek word that means to press. As its name suggests, a piezoelectric material is remarkable because it produces electricity when it is pressed, bent, or otherwise subjected to an external force. In other words, when the material is deformed, an electric current is generated. This piezoelectric effect was first discovered in 1880 by Jacques Curie and Pierre Curie. Pierre Curie, as many of you know, was the husband of Marie Curie. The Curie family is famous for having 4 Nobel Prize laureates, a reflection of their extraordinary contributions to science. Now, let's take a look at how a piezoelectric material actually works. The thin plate held by the tweezers is a piece of piezoelectric material that has been processed into a thin form. And the next image shows a small piece of the material with electrodes attached, forming a device that can bend. So what happens when we bend this device and change its shape? As you can see in the video, every time the device is bent, an electric current is generated. But this material has another fascinating property. A piezoelectric material not only generates electricity, it also changes its shape when electricity is applied to it. When alternating voltage is used, switching between the positive side and the negative side, the material repeatedly expands and contracts. And when this vibration is increased to a high enough speed, it becomes capable of producing ultrasound. Recent advances in thin-film piezoelectric devices have made it possible to generate not only hundreds of megahertz, but in some research cases, ultrasound close to 4 gigahertz, which is a vibration of 4 billion times per second. So why is this material able to expand and contract depending on the direction of the applied current? There are many materials that show piezoelectric behavior, but one of the most widely used is a material called PZT. The name comes from the initials of its component elements, lead, zirconium, and titanium. Using PZT as an example, let's explore why the piezoelectric effect occurs. To understand this, we need to go beyond what we can see with our eyes and examine the structure at the atomic level. As we zoom in further and further, we find that PZT is built from a repeating framework that has the shape of a rectangular solid with a square base. Each corner of this structure is occupied by a lead atom. Each of the 6 faces is occupied by an oxygen atom, and the center region contains zirconium and titanium atoms mixed in random positions. These frameworks connect in 3-dimensional space to form the full crystal structure. When we examine this structure closely, we notice an important feature. The zirconium and titanium positive ions at the center are not positioned exactly at the geometric center. They are shifted slightly upward. This very small asymmetry leads to a remarkable effect. Because the central positive ions shift upward, the upper region develops a weak positive charge, and the lower region develops a weak negative charge. In other words, the entire crystal becomes electrically polarized. Now let's imagine applying electricity to this material. If the positive side is connected to the upper surface and the negative side is connected to the lower surface, the central zirconium and titanium ions will try to move away from the positive side and they shift downward. This movement causes the entire structure to contract. If the voltage is reversed with the negative side on the top and the positive side on the bottom, the ions will try to move upward toward the negative side and the crystal expands. As a result, every time the polarity of the voltage is switched, the material expands and contracts. And just as we've discussed earlier, when this expansion and contraction is repeated very rapidly with alternating voltage, the material produces ultrasound. It might sound simple, but an astonishing principle lies within it. Devices that generate ultrasound using piezoelectric materials are applied in many different fields. The first field is medical imaging. The density and stiffness of tissues inside the human body vary from place to place, so ultrasound reflects differently depending on the tissue it passes through. Medical ultrasound equipment detects these differences in the reflected waves and reconstructs images of organs or a developing fetus. High-frequency ultrasound in the megahertz range has a very short wavelength, which allows the device to reveal even fine internal structures. The second field is non-destructive testing. The name may sound unfamiliar, so let's imagine a very large structure made of steel. After long periods of use, invisible internal damage can occur. The problem is that even if we want to disassemble only the area where damage might be present, the structure is often too large or simply cannot be disassembled. This is where non-destructive testing is used. The name comes from the fact that this method allows us to examine internal defects without harming the object itself. If cracks, pores, or foreign materials exist inside a metal or structure, the way ultrasound is reflected will change. Non-destructive testing equipment analyzes these patterns of reflected waves and estimates the location and size of the defects. Because it can evaluate the internal condition of a material without damaging it at all, non-destructive testing is now a widely used and essential technology across many industries. The third field is underwater detection, also known as sonar. In water, sound travels much farther than light, so by sending ultrasound into the water and analyzing the reflected signals, it is possible to locate submarines or schools of fish. The strong directionality of ultrasound and its clear reflection characteristics are used directly in this technology. The fourth field is ultrasonic cleaning. Ultrasound in the tens of kilohertz range continuously creates tiny bubbles in water or cleaning liquid, and these bubbles collapse instantly with great pressure and force. This process, known as cavitation, removes contaminants from surfaces. Thanks to this effect, even complex gaps and places that are difficult to reach can be cleaned thoroughly. The last example is ultrasonic fingerprint recognition. Ultrasound reflects differently depending on the detailed ridges of a fingerprint, and an ultrasonic sensor beneath the display analyzes these differences to reconstruct the fingerprint in precise 3-dimensional form. Light can only read the outer surface, but ultrasound can measure deeper structures in the skin, which provides a significant advantage in security. There are far more applications of ultrasound-generating piezoelectric devices than we could possibly introduce today. Piezoelectric materials are used not only in ultrasound generators, but also in technologies that produce small amounts of electricity by using the property that electrical charge is created when their shape changes. This area is known as energy harvesting. Even tiny movements, such as the vibrations created while walking or the shaking of machinery, can be converted into electricity through this same principle. Various various sensors that measure acceleration, vibration, or impact also use the principle in which the mechanical deformation of a piezoelectric material produces an electric signal. Piezoelectric materials are used in an impressive number of fields, and as I mentioned earlier, they're considered one of the most successful functional materials ever developed by humanity. However, even this material, which seems almost perfect, has one major drawback: it contains lead. Most high-performance piezoelectric materials are lead-based, which has raised ongoing concerns about worker safety and environmental impact. For this reason, research on lead-free piezoelectric materials is being actively conducted around the world, although it appears that more time will be needed before a material can replace lead while maintaining the same level of performance. So how was today's story? Isn't it fascinating that a tiny component we see every day can contain such remarkable principles of nature? Piezoelectric materials were discovered more than a century ago, yet research continues as we learn more about how their internal structure behaves and how electrical charge and mechanical deformation are connected. The more we study this material, the more we realize how much we still have to learn about nature. With that, we will bring today's story to a close. I'll return next time with another interesting topic. See you again in the next video.